Hey everybody, welcome back to Elfbait. It's me, Eli, and so one of the things I've been doing, for a long time is world building. Love to world build, and world building is often more than just throwing together a map and slapping some country names onto it. A lot of times it's about deciding what you want in your world and what you don't want in your world, and a lot of times that really comes down to what style of play you want to have for that world. If you're going to want a grittier world, you're probably going to want to limit your magic or limit your races. But one of the things that really comes up a lot for me, and what I feel colors my worlds more than anything else, is what races I allow. And so I've talked in a couple of videos about how to handle different races. I mean, certainly elves, dwarves, halflings, gnomes, and half orcs and all of the hybrids. They all come in a bunch of different shapes and colors, and you can certainly reskin them. 5th edition makes it really easy by having that base racial stat block along with the subrace fiddly bits, so you can really easily tweak the humanoids or demi-humans or whatever you have in your world. By modifying those subraces. A lot of times that comes down to just a matter of, hey, you have got, elves, they all are kind of like this, and then your wood elves and your high elves and your space elves, your fire elves, whatever, they have this. It comes down to a matter of adding a skill or some other minor ability, often a cantrip. Some to that effect. But there are also other decisions to make as far as designing, fitting your races, your various races, into a campaign setting. It's not just a matter of their stats. In fact, it's less about their stats than it is about who they are, what they do, what they are, and how they fit into your world. So, one of the best things you can do is simply, and I say it 1,000 times because it's really the easiest way, just reskin them. If you're not really happy with the idea of a gnome, make it something else. Leave it statistically a gnome, turn it into something else. Maybe instead of gnomes in your world, you have goblins. Your little tinker guys or your goblins. Gnomes are too close to dwarves for you, so in your world, all the characters that use the stats for gnomes, those are all now goblins. And goblins are not savage folk of the wilds, or there might be savage folk of the wild goblins, but maybe your gnomes are now also goblins, but they're the civilized goblins, or maybe they're a kinder, gentler form of goblin, or maybe they're just a bunch of right bastards like the rest of the goblins. They just don't want to eat you. They'll still steal your purse or whatever, but so that's your gnomes. It could be that half orcs and half elves are a thing for you. And maybe you, in your world, you don't like the idea of the races being able to cross, or if they do, it's very rare and magical, or maybe you're just a little uncomfortable with the odd implications of where exactly does a half-orc come from. Totally different video, not going to do that video, don't worry about it. It's easy enough to get rid of them. Again, you can make them something else. Thematically, it's easy enough to turn them into something else that is a little easier to deal with in your interpretation. The other thing to consider is departing from the monocultural aspect that D&D sort of paints over the demi-human races. Now, I think they do that for simplicity and for ease of presentation in a rule book. If you look at the rule book for D&D, elves are described rather generally, and dwarves are described rather generally. But also, really, humans are described generally as well. And they talk about, but the only real difference is that they talk about humanity and its differences being more cultural or geographical. And there's just sort of this basic conceit that a wood elf anywhere is going to be a wood elf. But are they? I mean, you could make an argument that, in your world, the wood elves of, say, Deep Hollow are very different than the wood elves of, say, the Thornbriar, And those two wood elf groups are very much, if they got them in a room with each other, they would have very different views. You know, Thornbriar, maybe they're really wild and they're really xenophobic. They live in the Thornbriar because the underbrush there is all nasty and it keeps, you know, it keeps outsiders out. Meanwhile, in Deep Hollow, those guys are, you know, they're homey, little kind of wood elves. They live right next to a human population. They trade nicely. Statistically, they're both wood elves, but it's no different. You may have multiple city-states of high elves out there. Maybe there's no great elven nation, and that's why elves don't rule the world. It's because elves don't breed fast. They live long lives, they live in small enclaves, and they do the thing. So you have all these different city-states of elves, kind of like maybe, you know, you could model them after the Greeks. The high elven city-state over here, very much a sea trading group that believes that, they are maybe they think they're the true descendants of Corellin Lorathan. God, that just didn't roll off. Corellin Lorathan. Or whatever elf god you happen to have in your setting. Meanwhile, there could be another elf city-state that's on the edge of a vast desert that is very militaristic, and they kind of defend the realm, and they're kind of very Spartan. But high elves could fit both of them. Now, you certainly could go down the rabbit hole here and start busting out those subrace things, and maybe it's just a matter of modifying, what it is that they do. Going back to the wood elves, Deep Hollow elves, maybe they prefer the longbow. Thornbriar elves, however, Thornbriar is too tangled and too cluttered for short bows or for longbows to really be an effective weapon. So maybe they use javelins. Maybe they use darts. Maybe they have some sort of other weapon that they use that is a close infighting weapon. Statistically, stat block wise, they're going to be the same as wood elves, but now your Thornbriar wood elves they've got a different weapon proficiency listed in their subclass than Deep Hollow wood elves. And so you could do this. You can do this with any of the races. For dwarves are always very much typified by being these isolationist, deep digging hoarders, at least mountain dwarves. Doesn't that really almost lend itself to having very distinct permutations of maybe a root culture? Sure, maybe all your dwarves are that typical rune casting Norse analog, but maybe these ones over here favor axes, these guys really favor hammers, and these are all sword wielding. Maybe they all latch onto a different prime dwarven god. Maybe these guys over here are much more elemental and much more pious. Maybe they have this particular dwarf hold has a higher percentage of elemental priests with you, or something. Maybe they're the ones who are closer to whatever ancestral deity, bred the dwarves, and so they're different. You don't have to change the stat block, but again, it could be coming down to a matter of different weapon choices. Again, sword, axe, hammer. You could even go so far as, I did this in one game where dwarves and gnomes were the same race. You had hill dwarves, you had mountain dwarves, and then you had forest dwarves. And for the forest dwarves, I use the stats for gnomes. They're all the same race. It's just where they happen to develop and what they like to do. You could go so far as to, if you don't like half orcs, kind of mentioned half orcs. Have half orcs just be weak orcs. In my current campaign that I'm getting ready to run here for 2008 for my Monday 2008. I time traveled back to 2008 to run a 5th edition game for my 3rd edition self. Yes, no. For the 2018 game, and the reason I'm calling it that is because that just happens to be where it's starting. It takes place in a kind of a dark, gritty medieval fantasy, or at least I hope it will. We still have to go through Session 0, so there might be some tweaking there. But I didn't want to put half orcs in there, so orcs, half orcs statistically are the same. Again, I just want to say that I want to apologize if I'm a little slurry or strained. I am getting over a cold, so bear with. But in that case, half orcs are just orcs who are outcast orcs. They are either too human and too personable, or too weak by orc standards to stay amongst the orcs. And those that manage to escape often glom onto human communities or hang around on their own in the wilderness. And so statistically they're half orcs, but they're just orcs. That same campaign I got rid of half elves as well, and half elves are now actually fey changelings. I just threw those out there, and half elves are now changelings, and they are fey-blooded humans, or possibly changed out. But there are so many ways to play around with character races that you really don't have to worry so much about doing new stats. But it's easy to do. I mean, everything in 5th edition is so modular. So if you are playing 5th edition, really just don't be afraid to scribble out longsword and write in mace. Don't be afraid to scribble out javelin and put in crossbow, or scribble out crossbow and put in, rapier. And remember that the names of things are less important than their mechanics. What you're putting down on your elves as rapier may be elven longswords, which are graceful and fast and sharp, and therefore fit the characteristics of a rapier. Where you're putting in, say, darts, it could be shurikens. It could be dwarven throwing axes, which are maybe weird little hand things with multiple cleaver blades that just kind of fit in the palm of their hands, and they whip them out there like that. Who knows? But don't be afraid to play with the cosmetics of the races in your game to make them more unique. And don't be afraid to have multiple variations of the same race in your game. Humanity does it all the time. I mean, if you really wanted to sit down with it, you could easily, and I have done this, set up a setting where humanity is the core race for the game, and there are very few other options, but where humans come from informs their kind of standard skills or abilities, much like the sub-races for elves or dwarves and the like. So, in Valderia, which is a campaign setting that I developed, there are Caravosans. Caravosans are smugglers, pirates, and stuff. And so they have some things that are naturally available. Now, in that setting, I also allow players to make generic humans, and those generic humans use the standard human from the player's handbook. But if you choose to go with one of the racial subclasses, racial and more like regional subclasses of humanity, then you get different stat bonuses and different skill options and stuff that are available. Because I wanted to breed this concept of flavor and national and regional reputation, kind of a holdover from like the old Conan books, where Hyrcanians were Hyrcanians, Cimmerians were Cimmerians, and Numenorians were Numenorians or Numidians or whatever. It's Picts were Picts. So you can even do this with humans. And actually, that can be a great way to get players to play humans. Instead of having all your humans use that standard human thing where they're all +1 on every stat, try going ahead and reducing that to maybe +1 on a couple of stats, some bonus proficiencies, some extra languages. That's another thing you can do to add complexity to your races in your game. Add layers of language. It may mean bumping up the starting languages for some of your players better. One thing I absolutely hate using in gaming, in D&D, at least by name, is common. the concept of a common language throughout the entire land that everybody somehow speaks, it never sat well with me. So I've alternately called it trade tongue, or whatever kind of pidgin or whatever it is. We have the Chinook jargon here in the Northwest was the Native American language that was often used between the tribes or the nations to communicate for trade. Developing something like that's good. You can have common in your setting. Perhaps you have had one long spanning culture that enveloped everybody for the longest time, and so common is a thing. Maybe there's some equivalent of Latin that's not just the realm of scholars and the learned, but maybe Latin is just that root tongue that everything kind of falls into. For Valdaria, I actually went so far as to do a language tree, and basically the Valdarian humans come from one root stock of invading people onto the continent that they're from, back in their ancient history. And there were three major tribal groups. Those three major tribal groups developed over the centuries into different language groups. And so I have a list of languages where a language tree where certain nations have a primary and a secondary language based on what language group they're from. I mean, this goes back to what tribe they came from, of these original barbarian settlers. And so, there are three different languages, but they can all kind of communicate with one another because there are similarities. It's not going to be 100%. And this is the thing I do with common in my games. If you're speaking common to somebody in my games, you're not getting complex ideas across. You are communicating simple ideas. But yes, so language variation can help add some richness to your races. Subcultures within the overall race is thing. Don't think monocultural. Think elves of Deepwood, elves of Thornbriar. The elven city states, and each city state is sort of different. Maybe one's very academic, one's very militaristic. You don't have to even go that far, because again, you're talking about making monocultures, but maybe you can split that over-encompassing monoculture into little bits of culture. Archetypes are good for gaming in a lot of ways because they're easily identifiable, so it's not something you necessarily want to do with entirely. Wood elves should still be wood elves, whether they're from Thornbriar or Deepwood, but make sure that there is some variation, and I think it'll add for a richer, more characterful environment. Don't be afraid to get crazy. Maybe your half-orcs are descended from a race of giants. They're the degenerate, devolved giants, giant race. Maybe you don't like having so many critters around, or so many demi-human races around. So maybe you like dwarves and maybe you like elves, but you think that halflings and gnomes are just diluting that concept a little bit more. Make your halflings mice and your gnomes hedgehogs and have them be humanoid and leftovers from some sort of ancient animal race. Make all the demi-humans animals. You could do that. I had this weird idea for a way back before Kung Fu Panda was a thing. I had this idea for wanting to do an Eastern setting where humans were there, but all of the animal forms of martial arts were created by those animals, and those animal humanoids had their own realms. So you'd be in the Crane Kingdom, you'd be in the Lion Kingdom, the Tiger Kingdom, whatever it would be. And so, and that was, I think, using the old Hengyokai rules from from the original AD&D. But it was this idea to mix it up a bit instead of having but you can do that. My current game has Dragonborn way off the map and as an NPC only race because they're this Far Eastern culture. The Dragonborn are going to be clannish based on the color of dragon that you are. and they're going to run the spectrum, and they're going to be this analog to the Far East, the literally Dragon Kings. And that's where I put them. Tieflings in that setting are NPC only. They're considered weird, superstitiously suspicious demon hybrids, or devil hybrids. So, long story short, all that stuff that's there in the player's handbook, look at the statistics that are there, look at what they're trying to tell you the things do. Add complexity and variation based on theme, skinning, cultural aspects, and you'll get this great kind of tapestry of for your world. Keeps your players guessing too. It's far too easy to have your players go into the woods and go, there's going to be wood elves here. Wood elves are like this. And you're at the DM, you're like, those were Deep Hollow. These are Thornbriar. Sorry, guys. Thornbriar is not going to be friendly. They're not going to offer you a place to stay for the night like the Deep Hollow guys. Thornbriar is going to have you running, chasing you, harrying you through those woods until you come out the other side or dead. They're not evil. They're just protecting their territory. But yeah, so think about it. When you're making a world, avoid the monoculture. Play with the stats. Swap out those skills. Swap out those languages. Swap out those weapon proficiencies. Add a toolkit. Why is it that you couldn't have a race of where everybody knows how to heal, and so everybody's got automatically some sort of proficiency with with a healer's kit, or maybe everybody's got proficiency with artisans' tools. Everybody in that race is some form of artisan. They're a culture of artists and creators, and so that's what they do. Whatever it is, do it. Your players will thank you. You'll thank yourself. You'll have a much more entertaining a game. I think your world will be richer, and see how it goes. So, thanks for joining me again. If you like to do this kind of stuff, let me know. Tell me about it. What have you come up with? What are some crazy ideas, or some interesting ideas, or even some minor variations on various character races that you have put in your campaign settings? Let me know. Talk about it in the comments below. That's the place to do it. Like, share, subscribe. Get out there, let folks know. Carrier pigeons, ravens, whatever it takes to get the word out. Love doing these videos. I'm going to keep doing them right here in my garage. It's badly lit and the sound sucks because it's just my phone. But doing it because I love it, not because I think I'm a movie star. Anyways, I think the cough medicine's kicking in. I'm getting a little goofy. I'm going to let you guys go. Get out and game, and thanks for coming by.